In business today, three things to know. First, President Obama in Brussels, where he extends open arms pushing for a new free trade agreement and works to unite Europe behind tougher Russian sanctions. Then, delayed again. The individual mandate for signing up for health care is extended, and small businesses go to court. The latest on turbulence for the Affordable Care Act. And skidding off the road. We look at bus safety and what should be done to improve one of the nation's most popular ways to travel. AriseXChange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. President Obama is in the capital of the European Union, where he pushed two major agendas: a new free trade agreement between the EU and the U.S., and keeping pressure on Russia over the issue of the Ukraine. Mr. Obama said the trade agreement currently under negotiation would make it easier for the U.S. to export gas to Europe and help reduce Europe's dependency on Russian energy. Here he is at the EU headquarters in Brussels.
I think that Europe collectively is going to need to examine, in light of what's happened, their energy policies to find, are there additional ways that they can diversify and accelerate energy independence. The United States as a source of energy is one possibility, and we've been blessed by some incredible resources. But we're also making choices and taking on some of the difficulties and challenges of energy development. And Europe's going to have to go through some of those same conversations as well.
Arise News Washington Bureau Chief James Blue is on the road with the president, and he is live right now in Brussels. James, good evening to you. Let me start by basically asking how the president is being received on this trip, because after some initial stumbles, he does appear to have a little, step in his feet these days.
Well, I think the stumbles were really just the president trying to build the coalitions that were necessary for him to give such a dramatic speech where he endorsed both NATO, the Western Alliance, and the need for all of them to stand up to what Russia has done. And so I think the reaction here is quite positive. People are pleased. And he did certainly criticize, saying that the EU countries need to do more in terms of supporting their militaries to strengthen NATO. But I think overall, people feel that the U.S., the West, and NATO are united in their push against Russia.
And is there a sense that the president is now really leading on this issue in the EU?
He certainly is the leader of this issue within the European Union, within NATO, and within the Western Alliance. He basically sort of gave a very detailed summary of why it was so important, why it is so important for the West to stand up to Russia. And I think in giving such a speech that was really received quite positively, he now has emerged as the one out in front, leading the challenge to Russia and the incursion into Crimea.
And James, talk to me about the trade deal that he's talking about today. We are running out of time.
No problem. I'll make it quick. What he really did was connect the need and the benefits of the trade deal as an instrument of foreign policy to fight Russia and to support Ukraine. And I think by doing so, he probably has picked up some support for the trade deal, both here in Europe and in the United States.
James Blue, you're off to Rome next. Thank you. If you have tried signing up for health insurance to meet the March 31st deadline, you are getting more time. The Obama administration says people who have begun the registration process but haven't completed it will get extra days to avoid penalties, but it won't say how many. Meantime, a group of small businesses from 6 states have sued in federal court trying to stop enforcement of the healthcare law. They argue that because they live in states that have opted not to set up healthcare exchanges, they cannot be subject to penalties. Grace Marie Turner is with the conservative-leaning Gallon Institute. Grace Marie, welcome back to AriseXChange. So,
hello, Andrew.
Can you walk us through a little bit about what this lawsuit entails?
Well, the number of states actually had ballot initiatives that said we don't want to have anything to do with this health care law, where we don't want the individual mandate, we don't want the exchanges, and federal law prevailed, and the federal government has come in and set up those exchanges, and they're saying we don't want to have anything to do with it, but partly because they see the distortions in their economy as a result of this law. So those are some of the lawsuits, but there was another lawsuit heard yesterday in Washington, D.C., challenging whether or not the federal government can, in fact, go into a state and establish these exchanges and allow federal subsidies to flow through the exchanges to their citizens. And that's being challenged.
Yeah, except if they're victorious, then basically the states are getting veto right over federal action. Congress has passed this. The president has signed it. Do you believe that the states and these small businesses actually have a legal ground to stand on, no matter where you come down on the Affordable Care Act?
I think that's a more difficult test, but I think this other challenge about whether or not it is legal for the federal government to allocate subsidies through these federal exchanges, when the law specifically says the subsidies are only available through an exchange established by a state. If a state doesn't establish the exchange, then the law actually protects them from having those exchanges created. So there are a lot of different cross currents here, but I think that these two lawsuits could actually juxtapose to allow some of those states to be protected in a different way, however.
Now, when you're talking about small businesses, these are still businesses with more than 50 employees, correct? Because that is sort of the cutoff here?
Well, yes, but there's a percolation effect in which if companies are selling to a bigger business and that business doesn't expand, then it affects everybody's commerce. And so it's the the employer mandate only applies to companies with more than 50 employees, although the Obama administration has changed that to say 100 employees. But there's still a ripple effect throughout the whole economy in those states.
Okay, so there has been a slight delay for those who have tried to sign up but haven't been able to, or in the registration process. Are you surprised by this?
You know, nothing surprises me. This one does a bit, though, because Secretary Sebelius has gone before Congress several times when members said, are you going to continue to delay implementation of this law or any of these other deadlines? And she explicitly said, no, midnight, March 34th is the deadline. We don't have further authority to extend it beyond that. And now they're saying, just tell us that you had trouble signing up and you can have at least 2 weeks longer. We don't know how much longer people will have. It surprises me that they're so callous, that they would tell people one thing to try to get them enrolled before the 31st. When they see they're not making the numbers, then they go forward and say...
Speaking of lawsuits, though, they would have a real lawsuit here if people are trying to sign up and they simply cannot comply with the law because the exchanges and the websites aren't working.
But they've already said that. They've already said that you can self-attest that you had trouble signing up and you couldn't get in, and therefore you can get a waiver, which is actually part of the law. But now they're saying we're going to actually give you 2 or 3, who knows how much longer, more weeks to sign up after their very explicit March 31st midnight deadline that they had said was in effect for a very long time.
Okay, Grace Marie Turner, you're always very good with us on the Gallon Institute. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew.
Turning to the markets now, stocks pulled back Wednesday after President Obama issued new warnings about the crisis in the Ukraine. Let's take a look at the final numbers on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down nearly 100 points to 16,268. The S&P 500 down 13 to 1852.56, and the NASDAQ off by 60. Taking a look at some of the top stocks we're watching today, Trustmark and Houston-based Green Bank are suing Target and its security vendor, TrustWave, over a data breach at the retailer. The banks are seeking more than $5 million in damages, Target closing up 14 cents to $59.50. Walmart recalling more than 170,000 dolls they say are really too hot to handle. The U.S. mega retailer says the My Sweet Love, My Sweet Baby Cuddle Care dolls are made with defective circuit boards that could potentially burn consumers. I'm going to have to send mine back. Down 64 cents to 76.23. And drugstore chain Walgreens says it's shutting the doors to 76 unprofitable stores by August as part of a plan to save $40 to $50 million a year. Walgreens closing down $1.49 to 64.93. And taking a look at commodities, gold down 760 to 1303, and oil, possibly because of the president's comments today, up over that $100 a barrel mark to 123. Coming up, your life is in the hands of a bus driver. Are bus companies doing enough to keep you safe? You're watching AriseXChange.
Arise News is a different kind of network. We are able to tell our own stories, and we're able to cover stories in a way that other media outlets don't do. We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well. Arise News is a place where we can tell stories in an interesting, factual, inclusive way like no one else in the business can.
Welcome back to Exchange. It's been a week of decent economic news so far, but still a choppy recovery. What sectors in the markets are now looking good? For that, we turn to Jim Awad, chairman at Plimsoll Mark Capital. Jim, welcome back to AriseXChange.
Thank you.
Some more economic news today. Orders for durable goods rising 2.2% in February. That's the biggest gain in 3 months. So what are we to make of these economic numbers that are sort of trending better, but still a little choppy?
Well, the headline number was good, and that's good that it was good. But if you strip out the transportation segment, it wasn't that strong. A lot of it was orders for Boeing. And then if you look at the business capital spending numbers, they weren't so good. So the numbers today are a continuation of what we have been experiencing, mixed, showing the economy continues to grow, but no major acceleration. On the other hand, no major deceleration. So what you see is what you get, which is 2 to 3% growth, which is not bad, not great, but not bad.
Yeah, that's what they're basically calling for. You didn't mention the CAPEX spending. That's a little bit of a concern, though. If businesses aren't, spending on capital improvements, that's a little bit of a worry.
And that's been consistent since the beginning of the recovery. Many of them still remember the financial crisis. There are more regulations now. There are more health care costs. Consumer confidence is mixed. And so businesses feel we've got all this cash. We really don't want to blow it until we are sure that the economy is going to accelerate from here to what they call escape velocity, which would make the recovery sustainable.
What do you think are the key drags right now on the economy? Because we're seeing a little bit better of improvement. We're seeing some acceleration in private sector growth, but there still feels to be a drag.
Right. Well, the government sector is still very mixed because you are in an era of shrinking government, although much of that is behind us, but there's a little bit more ahead of us. The lower-end consumer is not confident, and wages have not, in fact, after inflation, have been shrinking for some time. So this has been a capital recovery. The stock market's gone up, housing has gone up, but wages have not gone up, and employment is a very mixed picture. So the rich are doing fine. If you're above the median, you're doing better than below the median, but below the median is really struggling.
And there's still that real disparity in wages.
And not only that, it's accelerated over the cycle.
How much are we exposed to what's going on in Europe with possible sanctions?
Well, here's how it would play. If we just stopped here and there were a stalemate at this level, I think we could handle it. But if you have further Russian aggression, which is met with further sanctions, that could blow back economically to Europe, which could blow back to the United States and the financial system worldwide. So I think everybody understands we're playing a game of chess with Putin, that he also knows it, and he knows we can only go so far in terms of sanctions, and to an extent we may be a little bit of a paper tiger, and that we don't want to push sanctions so far that they blow back to us. So,
well, the president warned about that. He said there could be some economic pain here. It is a question of how much the EU wants to go along for the ride, because in fairness, the pain will be felt more by them than us.
Yes, and they are much more integrated with Russia economically, much more dependent on Russia for energy. And I think that they're more willing to cede geopolitical territory to the Russians than the United States is. So you've got three different players here, the Soviet bloc, America, and the Europeans.
You like to talk about sectors. So taking this all in, what are you looking at?
Well, the market's up an awful lot. It's not cheap anymore. There's been tremendous speculation in the fixed income market. So I don't think it's a time to be very aggressive. On the other hand, I'm not a bear because stocks profits still are growing and stocks are one of the better places to be. So I say stick with the big multinational companies with global exposure, geographic diversification, market dominance, and dividends. Sell small stocks, sell stocks with a lot of debt, sell your junk debt, sell your low-quality bonds, stay in, but stick with quality.
Go to quality.
Absolutely, across the board.
Okay, Jim Awad, as always, great.
My pleasure.
Thank you. A win for college athletes across the nation today after Northwestern athletes declared employees giving them the green light to form a union. The Chicago District of the National Labor Relations Board ruling late this afternoon that students' collective bargaining rights, that they could have collective bargaining rights. The NLRB Regional Director Peter Sung cited the long hours athletes put in and scholarships tied to performance as justification for the ruling. Northwestern University released a statement expressing disappointment over the ruling and says it would appeal the decision to the full National Labor Relations Board. This is just the beginning of that fight, folks. Nissan announcing a recall for over 1 million cars, vans, and SUVs whose airbags may not have inflated in a crash. This is the second recall to deal with this issue. Nissan is alerting owners and dealers that they will update the manufacturing software for free. Nissan recalled most of these vehicles in February of last year. However, they continue to receive consumer complaints and warranty claims even after the vehicles had been repaired. A spokesperson for Nissan reported 3 crashes where airbags did not inflate, however, could not confirm any fatalities or injuries. Facebook announcing today it has purchased the virtual reality tech firm Oculus for $2 billion in cash and stock. In a note posted on the site, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg hailed Oculus as the leader in virtual reality and hoped to forge new social experiences through the partnership. Oculus will remain based in Irvine, California, and operate independently within Facebook. Oculus executives released a statement expressing excitement at the acquisition and, of course, the $2 billion they're getting. King Digital Entertainment, the makers of the addictive mobile app Candy Crush Saga, had a rough first day. You can see the headlines, Candy Crush crushed, falling as much as 15% throughout the day in the initial public offering. The IPO was priced at $22.50 a share, but that fell as low as $19.08 by Wednesday morning. The poor performance was also felt by other mobile app designers like Zynga and Glue Mobile. The statistics are alarming. Dozens of commercial bus accidents claiming lives and injuring passengers across the nation. In fact, in the past 24 years, as many as 356 people have been killed on buses. Cheap fares and easy access make it attractive for passengers to choose these buses over other forms of transportation, and often they get frightening consequences. Critics say more regulations need to be in place to crack down on both the companies and the drivers. Henry Jasny is Vice President for Advocates of Highway and Auto Safety. Henry is an advocate for more regulations. Henry, when people get on airplanes, they ask all sorts of questions. But we get on buses all the time and not knowing anything. Tell us about the people driving these buses.
Well, the drivers of the buses come from all walks of life, but they don't have to have very high, rigorous standards to become a bus driver. They need to be 21 or older. They need to get a commercial driver's license and a passenger endorsement, and they're pretty much good to go. Then they have to get their medical certificate that they're cleared by the doctor. And so almost anybody can become a bus driver.
And they get, how extensive is the training?
There's no training. There's no minimum requirements by the federal government.
I am stunned.
We've been pushing for that for years.
Yeah, I am stunned by that because the U.S. Department of Transportation has very rigorous training requirements for all sorts of other transportation. But buses, you just need a license and you're good to go?
That's correct. Some of the bigger companies have their own training courses, but a lot of the smaller companies just don't do any training. They expect the driver, once they pass the test, to be able to drive it under any conditions.
Okay, we've all heard of Greyhound and we've all heard of Peter Pan, these sort of national brands, but there's been a lot of sort of startup companies, especially here in New York along the Northeast Corridor, that are popping up and offering very, very cheap fares. How are they getting away with these cheap fares? And is there any regulations on what level they have to perform at?
There's very little regulation at what they have to perform. They're supposed to be safe and do their own inspections, but there's no capitalization requirement to get into the industry. All you need is a few $100s to get a registration and a DOT number and a $5 million insurance bond, and you can be part of the industry.
And you're in the business. That's all you need.
And you're in the business. You can lease a bus. You don't have to even pay the money to buy one. And you hire a driver, and you can start transporting passengers. There's no even a test for you as a new startup company as to how will you know the safety laws, whether you understand the laws and regulations to keep passengers safe.
When you talk and look at these bus companies, in general, for these drivers, are a lot of these accidents related to the drivers? I mean, we can't blame them all on the drivers, can we?
Most accidents are a result of multiple factors. Very frequently, there is a driver factor involved. Either they're fatigued because they've been driving too long over the limits of their hours, or they haven't been sleeping well. They've been sleeping in the sleeper berth in the bus where they're cramped in. There are a lot of reasons why drivers would have problems, but that's only one factor.
Henry, does the government go in there and inspect and make sure that these drivers are not driving past their requirements?
No, they're supposed to keep their own hours of service in a logbook, just like truck drivers, and those logbooks can be falsified. They show one book to their company to get paid and another one to law enforcement when they're stopped. There's a new provision, a new rule that would require logging devices in the future, but they're not required to have them now.
Okay, what should consumers ask when they get on a bus? Should they do a little research?
They should do some research. There is some information on the government website of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. They've usually rated the bus companies because they're doing that for all passenger companies. And if they've been pulled over and inspected for violations, there may be some ratings as to their safety, as to what kind of violations they have. So you can get that information by the name of the company or by your state and look for ones that are in your area. On the government website.
Henry,
however, that's very limited information.
And generally speaking, how is the industry responding? You know, especially for the bigger companies.
Well, the bigger companies are doing some of the things they need to do voluntarily, but they are kicking and screaming about coming into the 21st century in terms of upgrading their buses, in terms of occupant protection. We only just last November got a seatbelt rule that in 3 years will require all new buses to have seatbelts. They're not required to have them now. Some of the bigger companies are putting them in, but smaller companies just don't do that.
And they have 3 more years. Henry Jasny, Vice President of Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ahead, they may be the Secret Service, but they party like frat boys. Our favorite people of the day, next.
Well, Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share.
In our regulatory police state segment, a story about a girl who shaved her head to show support of a friend who had cancer and how her school threw her out for violating the dress code. 9-year-old Cameron Renfo arrived at the Cap Rock Academy in Grand Junction, Colorado with a shaven head to show solidarity with her stricken friend. Her friend was undergoing chemotherapy for a rare form of cancer. The school's response? They sent Cameron home. School officials say they support Cameron's actions, but the rules are the rules. Well, after an onslaught of negative publicity from social media and local television stations, the school relented, and 9-year-old Cameron is back in class with her shaved head. And time for our favorite people of the day, when we pick one person, or in this case, people who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. Today, they are 3 Secret Service agents who decided to go on one heck of a bender while traveling with the president in Europe. I love it. Secret Agent Man playing underneath. That's awesome. Nice. According to the Washington Post, the agents went out for a night of drinking in the Dutch capital ahead of the president's arrival. And one of them was found passed out in the hallway of their hotel. Couldn't even make it back into the room. The agents were sent home for, quote, not exercising better judgment, you think? They are also being blamed for causing yet another embarrassment for an agency that has a slew of them recently, including a trip to Colombia 2 years ago when agents brought prostitutes back to their hotel rooms. The agents involved in the night out in the Netherlands are being disciplined, and so for tying one on while on taxpayer dollars, 3 unnamed Secret Service agents are our favorite people of the day. Coming up next, how the weather froze out the travel industry. You're watching AriseXChange.
One of the great things about Arise Entertainment 360 is we have this Arise to Your Health segment, which really focuses on the holistic approach of being healthy. So we do everything from working out to juicing to getting in shape by doing fun exercises like bouncing on a trampoline or wearing these bouncy boots on our feet when we're jumping all over the set. We've done karate, we've danced the weight off, we've done just about everything. And of course, I love when we eat on set, but we do it in a very healthy and clean way.
The extreme weather conditions this winter put a deep freeze on revenue for businesses and travelers this year. Analysts say the leisure travel industry also took a big hit, with losses in the $300 to $500 million range, and say consumer losses were far higher. Travel Zoo senior editor Gabe Saglier joins us from Santa Barbara, California, where the weather is a whole lot nicer. Gabe, welcome back to AriseXChange. I'm a little surprised by this because I would think that with all the cold weather, everybody would want to get out of town.
Well, what it was just these record-setting days of cancellation and delays. So we saw about a $300 to $500 million loss in the travel industry. And then, of course, consumers were talking $2 to $4 billion in losses as travel plans were just completely derailed. Now, you look at the ski industry. I think that as soon as one of these major storms came and went, within days, the snow bunnies were on those hills. That's when the conditions are obviously at their very best. But overall, with all the cancellations, all the delays, all the last-minute plan changing, I think resulted in a bit of a dip overall. But very, very quickly, I think we're seeing a rebound. Pent-up demand has translated to some more bookings now, and we're seeing some pretty aggressive reach by the travel industry, a lot of flash sales, a lot of customized emails going out there, and people responding.
I would think that they have to take advantage of this because there's a lot of people in this room to begin with who want a vacation. And so I would think that the travel industry is trying to reach them. And how are they doing that?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is actually looking at, what was the last trip that you booked through a particular travel agency? They're looking at that, and if there are sales in these destinations, they're actually specifically targeting consumers. So these sort of customized outreach, a lot of flash sales out there. So people who are signed up for a lot of these alerts from travel companies, from airlines or hotels, are getting dibs on some pretty dramatic sales. Surprisingly, I think that very early on, right after the beginning of the year, as these storms began to roll in, consumer demand started shifting to post-winter dates. So we were looking at about 100 to 150 degree increases on searches to our site, for example, to Mexico, to the Caribbean, starting at about March or April. So I think people were actually either changing their plans at the last minute, trying to sort of circumvent a lot of the delays and cancellations that were becoming increasingly more prevalent, and looking at March, April, May, June travel. And we're starting to see that uptick in reality.
I was going to ask you, Gabe, if maybe this has actually extended the season for some of the Caribbean hotspots, meaning maybe more people are going to go there in June now. Are you seeing that?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, what we're seeing usually, we see prices peak in January and February for places like the Caribbean and Mexico. We're seeing some of these prices now trickle into March and even into April. A couple of destinations in Mexico have sales beginning in April, but most of them now starting in May and into June. And even some summer prices not softening at this point. We would expect to see some Caribbean destinations offering some pretty good sales for June, July, August. Those are a little bit slower in coming. So I think that the idea here is that enough pent-up demand after a rather brutal winter will result in unusually good numbers in spring and the summer season. Now, that said, we'll still see some great sales in places like Florida, the Caribbean, Mexico, Hawaii in those characteristic months, which is June, July, August. But otherwise, we might not see as many of those sales as some of these companies try to take advantage of.
How do you think the airlines did basically during the season, and do you think they're going to be punished by consumers when the weather improves?
Well, the airlines probably took the biggest hit in the industry overall over the January, February period overall. I mean, a lot of these airlines were stuck with a situation of having to bump people and simply not having enough aircraft, enough crews available to make those trips happen. And many trips were simply blown out of the water, and airlines were not able to charge some of these change fees and rebooking fees that they depend on in a big way. But they can control capacity very beautifully. So as demand begins to increase in the spring and summer months, I think we're going to start to see airfare prices not soften as quickly or as dramatically as we might see usually. And I think that as capacity continues to remain very tightly controlled, we'll see airplanes continue to fly pretty full. and airlines able to actually generate some profits out of those practices.
So the takeaway, if you ran a ski mountain this past winter, as compared to other years, you probably did better. Gabe Saglier, thank you so much.
Exactly.
Tomorrow, we'll have more on the very big ruling giving student athletes at Northwestern University the right to unionize and what might be next. We'll discuss college athletes for them, college athletes across the nation. Let's take a look at the final numbers. The S&P 500 down 98 points, red across the board. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching AriseXChange.